I am always excited to share about Paul's letter to the Romans. This is the thing I spent so long, and I'm still spending a lot of time writing about Romans, thinking about Paul's letter to the Romans. And um, to me, if you wanted to get into the nuts and bolts of it, and you start to play it, it's about welcoming both Jews and Gentiles to be part of the community of faith. That's the real gist of it. I make the argument that Paul's letter to the Romans is the most important piece of literature for Western civilization. And you can be like, well, what about the Gospels? What about the Bible as a whole? Um, I don't. I mean, absolutely. But you realize that civilization has turned based on what people have said and how they have read Paul's letter to the Romans. And we can go through and trace it out, beginning in the way that people took Romans early, um, specifically when Constantine became the emperor and endorsed Christianity. Um, Romans 13 all of a sudden was a pretty important piece. St. Augustine and his reading of Romans, that's what he was reading when he felt the Lord do something in his heart. And when he came to Christ, Aquinas and his reading of Paul and the way that Paul's rhetoric um, really made a difference in his philosophy and his theology. Martin Luther, he read Romans and it totally changed the way he viewed the church and his own role within the church, so much so that the Reformation was born in 1517. You could go through and talk further about John Wesley in England in the 1730s and 40s when he felt his heart strangely warmed. And then more recently, but still 100 years ago, when Karl Barth, his commentary on Romans, made a huge impact in the German-speaking world and then beyond. What they said was that Barth's work on Romans threw a bomb into the playground of the theologians. And Karl Barth's reception of Romans ended up being a key, influential, significant piece for the opposition parties to the Third Reich. More recently, people have read Romans and looked at the significance of it. And now people are starting to look more closely at the relationship between Jews and Gentiles. And I think that's so important. It's essential that you read Romans not as a letter where it's Christians against the Jews, but this is a letter that talks about Christians and Jews at the same table. Matter of fact, I don't even know if Paul would have responded to the term Christian. I'm not sure if it was available to him to use. He doesn't use it in his letters. Believers, possible. He does say that. And the book of Acts makes it seem like the term the way was used. But, so this letter was supremely, really influential and important. So let's talk about the historical background of this letter. And every letter, of course, has to have its own background. And Paul's letter to the Romans fits that description. So here we go. In Romans 15, verses 23 through 29, Paul describes a situation where he's heading to Jerusalem to deliver an offering. And this provides part of the impetus. He wants to deliver this offering in Jerusalem, and then he wants to then make a trip to Rome. He's never been there. And so that's going to provide Paul the opportunity to visit and to make a first impression in the biggest city of the world. But he says this to the people, and if you're familiar with Acts, the latter chapters, you know that this is a little foreboding. He says he asks the Roman Christians to pray for him. Pray that everything will be successful when he goes to deliver this offering. And my point is, when's the last time you had trouble giving money away? That's what Paul was going to do. He's going to give money away, and he needed to be prayed for about that. In that same chapter, chapter 15, Paul alludes to his Spanish mission. That's where he's going. And he says that he's used up all his opportunities in the East, and now he's setting his sights on the West. And so the idea here is, with a new mission, a new city, there's a new possibility for Paul to do some new things, and he wants to use Rome as a base of operations. Now, if you look at Romans 16, there are going to be some names there that are really, important. It gives you some context for the city. And so I would like to try to, I'm going to see if I can share this with you so you can kind of get a glimpse of these names. Okay, so Romans 16. I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a deacon of the church at Cenchreae, so you may welcome her, it says, in the Lord, as is fitting for the saints, and help her in whatever she may require from you, for she has been a benefactor of many. So Phoebe has been the benefactress of many, and Paul tells the Romans that they're supposed to help her. This is a huge deal. And one point that I'd like to make is against the idea that Paul was a misogynist here. The name Phoebe, it's a woman who's in charge of bringing Paul's letter. This means several things that are really important. For one, she was wealthy enough to make the trip. You had to pay for your own way. Two, she could read. Literacy rates in the ancient world varied. There was a webcast that I got to go chase down about literacy in the Roman world today. I missed it, but usually the forecasts are between 2 and 5%. For a woman to be able to read would be even more. The odds would be significantly less. She had to take a crew with her to protect her. And so Phoebe must have been wealthy, and she's the one, as a deacon of the church, she's going to read the letter. At Cenchreae, you see the term here. This is the place. Now, you may remember that that's a place in Corinth. That's one of the port towns where the games are held. So Paul is drafting Phoebe out of this town of Corinth, where she will take this letter on his behalf. Notice what it says about Phoebe. She welcome her in the Lord, as is fitting for the saints. Help her in whatever she may require from you. She has been a benefactor of many, and of myself as well. Paul could not endorse her any more. The term here, I commend to you, that's an interesting term. You may recall that we talked that when we looked at 2 Corinthians chapter 2 and 3, where Paul has to do battle with people who think that he needs a letter of recommendation. And here we have his letter of recommendation to Phoebe, for Phoebe. And Paul treats her in every respect with the same kind of credential as Timothy, as Silas, or Barnabas. And so Paul here has a track record, established track record, of elevating females to a place of leadership. Lydia in Acts, Euodia and Syntyche, and we're going to find in Philippians. And Phoebe here clearly is in the role of a teacher, someone who's going to read the text. Look at verse 3. Greet Prisca and Aquila. Now remember, those folks from the book of Acts and also from Corinth, they had been expelled from Rome, probably in 49 under Claudius, and then when Nero takes over in 56, they're allowed to come back or go back to Rome. And so it may be, we're going to look at it in a minute, but this may be an allusion to their role in beginning the church. They look at how it says they risk their necks for me, right? Mary, there's a Jewish name. Epaenetus, first convert in Asia. So that might be the Galatian respondent. Andronicus and Junia, my relatives who are in prison with me. Now that's a very interesting. What does that mean? Does that mean they were rounded up with Paul? And where was this prison where they are rounded up? Obviously, he has not gotten to Jerusalem yet. So this cannot be an arrest that ends up taking him to Rome, but as a prisoner. That has yet to unfold. And so that's why I pointed out when we looked at chapter 15 that there was this little sense of foreboding where Paul has to ask for prayer. We know that it didn't go well in Jerusalem when he took the money. He tried to do that well, and it didn't end well. So maybe this imprisonment is from the third missionary journey. He's probably on that journey as he writes Romans, so maybe it is from Philippi, where he was imprisoned, or maybe this is in Ephesus or some other place. One thing we always have to bear in mind, and that is we have so little from Paul. If he writes these letters and we manage to hold on to them, imagine how many others he had written that we have not been able to identify or hold on to. I point out the name Mary, that's a Semitic name, Jewish name. Andronicus and Junia, relatives, right? Ampliatus, a beloved in the Lord. Urbanus. These names are not, Urbanus is a Latin name, right? Ampliatus sounds Latin. Apelles, Stachys, Herodian, greet those in the Lord. Tryphonea, Tryphosa, Persis, Rufus, Asyncritus, Phlegon, Hermes, Petrobus, Hermas, the brothers and sisters with them. Greet Philologus, Julia, Nereus, and his sister in Olympus, right? Where is my guy Clement? Isn't Clement in this list? Did I miss Clement somewhere? Let's see. Did I miss Clement? I thought there was a Clement in here, but I don't see him right off the top. And I don't want to waste my time. What's my point? My point is that when Paul says to greet one another with a holy kiss, he has no idea what social distancing is all about. Telling people to make out in the middle of church, what kind of a gross thing is that? No. I mean, rather, these names show that Paul has a lot of connections. All these names may indicate that there are prayer houses involved. Prayer houses were just regular places. Some of them were more elaborate and than others, but prayer houses where people gathered to pray, kind of like a synagogue, but not quite. And there were prayer houses for other deities as well. But Christian ones. Where is Paul writing? He's probably writing to Trastevere, which is this. It's real. I mean, it's a little suburb in Rome. It's right in the city near an aqueduct, a spot where slaves and lower class lived, the lower class freeborn. He's writing to Rome. All these people that he knows there, a city of 1 million. He's going to know a few, especially since he was traveled. And Nero is the emperor at the time. Remember Julius Caesar? He is assassinated, and Augustus, his name is Octavian when he starts, and Augustus when he finishes. Augustus rules until 14 AD. Tiberius takes over in 14, and after Tiberius comes Caligula, who only lasts a few years, and then Claudius shows up. And Claudius is the emperor until 56, when Nero takes the throne. And just a little note of preview coming distractions. The adoption functions here. Julius adopts Augustus. Augustus adopts Tiberius. Claudius adopts Nero. And so the imperial succession moves through this thing. That's going to become important when we get to chapter 8. So that's just a little brief start. We're going to resume our intro with the next video. I'm glad you could join us. Tell me something you learned in the comments.